To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Central Aranda people, whose land I'm talking to you from. The land is known as Mbarntwa, town of Alice Springs, and it's particularly relevant to what I'm going to talk about today, because one of the main dreamings of this Mbarntwa is the tar vine caterpillar, and actually a number of other insect larvae. So it's a very significant totem or dreaming from this country. So I always feel it feels very, very special to be talking about this topic from this place. Now, I'm not talking about the Aranda language. I'm talking about Kaytetye, which is spoken some 300 kilometres north of here. But both Kaytetye and Aranda are Arandic languages, so they do have a lot of similarities. And just to point out how important and how visual these particular dreamings are, the tar vine grub and a couple of other, is that they're really prominent in Alice Springs, in Mbarntwa itself. Here's the car park in the car park near the shopping centre. Just had this great new mural done featuring the tar vine and as well as the tar vine grub larvae. The school, Yiparinya School, really interesting sort of use of this term because it's a primary school and, children become adults. So it was a very appropriate term for this school, the Indigenous school in the town. So that's really just to orientate you where I am and how important these concepts are, such as this particular caterpillar. But what I am going to focus on today is the category of edible insect larvae, which is one of 5 categories in these languages. And I'll be talking about this in relation to the Kaytetye language. And this category is often referred to as grubs, grubs in English. Technically, these are not all grubs, because a grub refers to a wood-dwelling, a wood-boring insect larvae, whereas the Kaytetye and the Aranda categories refer to both caterpillars, in fact, a lot of different sorts of insect larvae. But colloquial, this is often paraphrased in Aboriginal English as just grubs, right? So that's the category that I'll be talking about. And the most well-known exemplar from this category of food is the Wichita grub, and it's very, very popular still today, and really important part of the diet. Just to give you some history about when researchers started documenting the importance of insects as food. There's an article by Norman Tyndale that goes, this is 1966 article, and he writes, these edible insect larvae make up a significant part of the diet. Children are kept quiet by the cossid and hippoelid grubs constantly dangling from their mouths. In our society, a dummy replaces this early natural food for children. And, it's really exciting, I guess, to see when we do bush trips that children are just as much, running around with these grubs in their hand, cooking them, dangling out of the mouth. So they're still very popular and they're incredibly nutritious. Some of you may know Tyndale as a linguist. So his one of the earliest maps documenting languages and tribal regions in Australia is this one you may be familiar with. So this was, I guess, a precursor to the more common IATSIS map, which I'll move to in a sec. But this is just to let you know, I suppose, that many of you may not have known that Tyndale was in fact an entomologist who spent a long time studying insects and Indigenous Australian uses and relationships to insects. So Kaytetye there in the centre on the IATSIS map, you can see it in the yellow. It's an Arandic language, and the blue is Aranda, where I am. So these this region is known as the Arandic language region. From a linguistic point of view, these are all related into and known as the Arandic subgroup. But Kaytetye and also Protam, which is sort of in the south, they are a little bit more, a little bit different, and we'll sort of get to some of that in a moment. And I've listed there a couple of other Arandic varieties, which you may have encountered, so as well, Alyawda and Wichita. So Kaytetye is a language with about 100 speakers, really endangered, a bit like Protam, not many speakers. In contrast, Arandic and Alyawda and Wichita have well over 1,000 speakers. So returning to Kaytetye, and Kaytetye is the word for the food class of edible insect larvae. I'll be coming back to that in a sec. Just want to show that they're, can be eaten cooked as well as raw. And so in the project that we've been doing, documenting this food class with the community, we've done a number of bush trips, and this is just the back page for from one of our school resources. So Kaytetye, there's the word there, the Kaytetye word for edible insect larvae. And, people don't, the kids, just love doing this. And so we've called our book in English, The Grub Hunters. And this is just a local school resource. So, PowerPoint laminated, but we've also uploaded it into the Living Languages archive, which is accessible through Charles Darwin University. It should also be noted that not everything in this category of Kaytetye is equally edible. Now, I've suggested that the Wichita grub is in fact the prototype of this category. It's the most favoured. And, there's sort of this climb from, the best, most, it's not just, the best tasting, but also the most abundant. So if you if you go hunting for Wichita grubs, you can find up to 20 grubs in the one tree. And this is a bit different to other trees, which might only have a couple. So it's very prolific. You get more bang for your buck, so to speak, when you go for Wichita grubs as well. Some are, not so popular, and people, wouldn't really get those today. And some are, of course, marginal and would have probably only been eaten in really harsh summers, when there just wasn't much else available. And the curl grub is one of those. People today might debate about whether you can eat it, and obviously times have changed. So it's really important to remember that these are not all equal. All the ethnospecies, or all the different types of edible insect larvae. So just a brief summary of this class. Most of these Kaytetye, edible insect larvae, reside in acacias, and that's the major sort of ecological woodland in this region. So the acacia forest, I suppose you'd say, is the most common ecological zone. And most of them are root dwelling. Only 6 of the 28 edible insect larvae are found in roots. So there's 6 that are found on some other part of the plant. So I've mentioned the Wichita grub, favoured food. Another feature about the Wichita grub is that there is unique vocabulary. So when you have sort of keystone species, you often get this special vocabulary surrounding it. It's quite a good indicator of how important it is in a society. And so there's sort of unique Wichita grub words. There's also songs about Wichita grubs, traditional land-based songs. It's a major totem, as I've signalled here, and also in Kaytetye country. There are also proper nouns, place names that feature various types of edible insect larvae. I've just got a photo here of a ruined Wichita grub, right? So it's not the thing to do. And this sort of thing comes up in some of the traditional songs about, accidentally destroying these important food in the process of hunting them. The reason why I'm really talking about this from a linguistic point of view, like why is it so interesting linguistically, is that words in this category are sort of quasi-productive. So there is a quasi-productive method, construction of forming edible insect larvae. Okay, so it's really interesting in terms of the vocabulary. Right, so I'm just going to, and that's really what I'm going to focus on, how these terms in this category are created. So in this talk, you'll see some slides where I've got two numbers, because what I've done is I've just sort of put in slides from the school book, and you'll see this, you know, they're kid friendly. There's some call outs and the two names there. Much of the material, the example sentences for the school book, were drawn from the dictionary that I did with my late collaborator, Kumje Ross. So we were actually sort of in the process of this project, this Kaytetye project, when she passed away. And the poster that I'll be showing some examples from today has been done sort of, I guess, in honour of her contributions to all this language work. So we were sort of in the process of doing this. So, okay, I just wanted to illustrate the importance of these in place names. So here's a particular kaytetye. It's called El Pernate, the whitewood grub. And here's the site that relates to one of the actions in the dream time. So this is a whitewood tree dreaming site, El Pernate. And in fact, where we collected some of these grubs is just below there, just underneath those hills there. And here's Michael and Anna harvesting the whitewood grubs from this tree here. Okay, so I've mentioned the work with my late collaborator, and when we did the dictionary, we had about 28 different ethnospecies, right? 28 different names for kaytetye. In fact, there was a few more because they're synonyms, but 28 different ethnospecies. And we didn't really tackle this very well. We didn't know what they were in English, didn't really know what the relationship was between, you know, the biological Linnaean system thing that it signified and the Kaytetye word. So we sort of left that to do later, which is what we've tried to do more recently. So before I sort of go, I'm going to go into now the language surrounding the ethnospecies in this category of food. So now I've given you a bit of cultural background and contextual information, how important this is. And now we're going to sort of dive down into the structure of the vocab. Right, okay, so Kaytetye has both natural class classifiers and functional classifiers. So Kaytetye, edible insect larvae, is really a functional classifier. Just to show you some of the natural class classifiers in this language, there's words for person, snake, plant, grass, flying creature, and some of these natural classes are different to English. So, dunker and flying creature includes bats. It doesn't include emus. Okay, so there are just some differences why we haven't sort of said birds in things like this. As well as natural class classifiers, there are functional classifiers. So food classes. And in Kaytetye, there are 4 main food classes. Note that the edible seeds is a subcategory of run, or vegetable food. And again, there are some things you might not expect, like eggs. If you're thinking of the egg and spoon race, they are regarded as meat because they are animal-derived food. Now, you could also put water here, and water's interesting. It sort of straddles both functional and natural classes, but you can certainly, they could be considered both classes. And so what I'm just going to show you that these can, both natural class and functional classes can co-occur. So just highlighted here, Kaytetye, that's the functional class I'm looking at today. So in the green, I've got some functional classes, the meat category, and then you can have the natural class classifier. So in the first one, we've got like a superordinate, subordinate construction, snake meat. Okay. In the second one, it's really more of a predicate noun phrase. So the black-headed python snake is edible, and it's describing, the functional classifier sort of describes the function of that particular species. And there's two ways that these functional classifiers can be used. They can be used in a generic specific construction, like in one, the kangaroo meat is carrying kangaroo meat back on his shoulders. We don't tend to do this in English. Shall we go out for a hamburger meat or a hamburger food? We don't tend to use them, but it's really common to use them in everyday speech in Kaytetye. The functional classifier can also stand for a specific, so it can be used as a bare noun. So literally, he carries the meat whole. Context tell you it's kangaroo that's being talked about, and but you can see there it's a different category. It's just used without a specific. Okay, so I should point out too that both the prototypical member of Kaytetye, which is Aitnyamate, Wichita grub, can be used as a classifier for root-dwelling edible insect larvae. In contrast to Ayapate, dreaming from where I am, which can be used as a classifier for all caterpillars. So, this has caused a lot of confusion in some of the early ethnographies, particularly, turn of the century type ethnographies, which struggled with this idea that you could also use a specific Ayapate, Tarvine caterpillar, as a generic for all sorts of caterpillars. But this is pretty common ways of using language, certainly in Arandic languages. So I'm just going to show you now a picture from our poster illustrating the naming strategies. So on the poster, we did the plant name down the bottom and the edible insect larvae up the top. So the first one here is the edible insect larvae Awutanthate, and that is always found in the Awutantha, the dogwood. Okay. Similarly, the edible insect larvae in the swamp kangaroo grass, Kundilchate, as you can see, is derived from the name of the swamp kangaroo grass, Kundilch. So we can summarize this naming strategy as something like the host, Wichita bush, Nym, plus the eta suffix, the edible grub of suffix. And then you've got Aitnyam plus eta is Aitnyamate. And in fact, this is how the generic term Kaytetye came about. So the eta has got this additional K on the front, which is very common in the word in Kaytetye. In fact, you will notice the similarity in the language name, Kaytetye and Kaytetye. Now, that's coincidental, but what is not coincidental is this K increment that's put on the left-hand edge of these highly reduced sort of words. More can be said about that later, but I will keep pushing on. So I also wanted to say that it's cognate with other languages. So other Arandic languages have similar strategies. So the examples, I'll just show you one example from everyday speech. It's actually from a narrative where we've got both the generic Kaytetye plus the specific edible insect larvae. So in this sentence, the Kamada has referred to two different types of edible insect larvae, the Agpelate, river red gum grub, and the Adnkarate, the kulbar grub, and also used as the generic Kaytetye. So Kaytetye Agpelate, the superordinate plus the subordinate, or the generic specific. And the interesting thing about this, you could almost consider it as like a trinomial construction. So if you think of binomials, as having two elements, like in the Linnaean naming system. You know, we've got a species, we've got a generic plus a species, Acacia kempiana for Wichita bush. So it's actually, in a way, sort of a three-part construction, which is quite unusual if you consider some of the work by taxonomists such as Berlin, who talk about the frequency that binomials are used. So if you think about it, we've got Kaytetye belaid, so we've got the generic Kayta, we've got the specific, the river red gum, and then we've got this sort of suffix put onto the specific. So it's three components here. And maybe it's not dissimilar from other generic specific constructions where you can put the functional up the top, like we saw meat, snake, black-headed python. The black-headed python snake is edible. So it's sort of similar in a way to this, I think, the fact that you can sort of stack these things. Notice that Kayta there is no natural classifier insects, right? So Kayta just sort of has a bit of both, but it's primarily a function. It primarily refers to edible food category rather than insects. So many insects that are not edible aren't called Kayta. So how productive is this naming system? Well, there's 28 different ethnospecies, quite a few more names because they're synonyms. There are 4 Kayta that are not based, there are 4 grub names that are not based on the name of the host. And I'm going to look at those. And there's also a handful of applications of Ada that are semi-acceptable, suggesting that it's like quasi-acceptable, it's quasi-productive. So let's have a look at these. This is some quasi-productive Ada words, and they're quite interesting in terms of borrowings and things. So looking at the first one here, the edible insect larvae from Acacia macdonaldensis. Such a mouthful. It's really good just to be able to say elithate. Very, very neat. So this is not quite the name of the host. The host is alith. Maybe the edible insect larvae strategy doesn't like reduplications. I've never seen any before. So, you know, some people say, oh yeah, you could accept alithate, but you know, it's not that common. The second one here, the name of the host is Putna and Putnade, but there is a recent borrowing, Purutha, from the neighbouring Arandic language, and people don't really like to say Purutate. So this suggests a historical component to these borrowings and the reluctance to sort of make the Ada productive on them. Similarly, with the edible insect larvae that lives in the roots of the Salsoli Cowley, Alkerl or Alika. So you can say Ilikarinya, which is a just, you know, thing belonging to the Salsoli Cowley, but not the, you can't put the aid on it. But then some people say, well, you can have alkerlate, which again is the Arandic word. So there is some, I guess you'd say, process of adjusting or juggling this productivity when it comes to new vocab. And it's a similar example with the third. The fourth one is a little bit more interesting. I'm going to actually come back to it, but it's what we've got here is a unique Kaytetye word for the tree, Virginia. It's actually called emu bush, so I'll just call it emu bush. So the edible insect larvae on the Virginia is called alorpa in Kaytetye. But it's a really endangered word, I guess, because people don't eat this, and it's a unique lexical item. So more and more people are saying Widginate, Pnudding ate. Those words, Pnudding, that's from other languages. And Widginate, you know, older speakers will say, no, you can't say that. You've got to say a lot about it. But younger people, you know, they'll say it because they're sort of applying this Ada productively to new words. Similarly, with the edible insect larvae Kaytetye, which lives in the gall of the bloodwood tree. I'll just show you. That's a little bit interesting. It's a bit different. So that's the gall in the bloodwood tree. It has an edible insect in it, and the edible insect is known as Kaytetye, but younger people will say Kaytetye or gurpunpaid to mean the insect. So the other interesting thing is words in the Kaytetye category that do not use the host name. So, what's going on here? Here's a very common one, a kulpaid. Someone who knows it's their actual name. So a lot of these are sort of very important foods in religion, as I've mentioned. And it's just saying it's making me think of this person. So a kulpaid is a type of edible insect larvae that lives in lots of plants. So already we've got a problem, right? So if it lives in lots of plants, how can you choose one? Okay, so interesting. But if we look, so the possible origin for this is Akarpas elpera. People describe this grub as, it's got a flat head, a kelpera, flat head. So, and if we look at it, this is how we dealt with in the poster. You can see it's got its, fat head compared to the Wichita grubs and various. Here it is, the putnade here, or the etniumate here. It's really characterized visually by this big head, and we've just signaled that on the poster with this dotted line, showing that it's in different plants. The other one of interest is a kulchate. Now, in our project, in all the fieldwork, we couldn't actually locate this, and that's really to do with people just don't know. They don't know exactly whereabouts in the mistletoe this particular edible insect larvae is. So, this is one of these, there's a few terms that just the knowledge hasn't been passed on to the extent of the other vocab. Interestingly, the first part of this word is the word for a kulch, which is a armband made of hair string. It's worn on the upper arm here. And so presumably there is something in the mistletoe that might look like an armband. Could be a visual, but we really don't know. And this is how we dealt with it in the book. We've looked through many mistletoes but haven't been able to find it. And we've pulled out this example. This was from Harold Cox's field notes. So this is from about 1974. And obviously this speaker who provided this information is not around anymore. But the important thing is we had some clues from these old recordings, and speakers really used this to help try and work out where these things might live. Jalka and alorpa, right? They just don't have this edible insect larvae suffix, and they're both caterpillars. So I actually will just show you one of these. This is a really important dreaming as well. And so this is the emu bush, and the unique vocabulary for this is alorpa. So why is this? Well, possibly it's related to the fact that this is a very important plant. In fact, in English, its name is emu bush might come from the fact that it's always used to you cook emu with this, and emu is really culturally significant. Obviously, it's also quite a striking caterpillar. So yeah, alorpa doesn't fit this category. Now, caterpillars are eupates, right? Were probably more marginal food. It's the wood-boring plants that were more favoured. So perhaps these last two here, Jalka and alorpa, do not have the 8 because the focus is really on their significance in perhaps mythology. And yes, they can be eaten in hard times, but the most important is their religious significances. And I think I was just going to show you in Jalka. No, I haven't got Angelica. Sorry, I didn't put that on. So, okay, so I've just looked at these two that have unique name and they don't use this 8 suffix, but they are edible. Okay, so interesting. And they're very important religiously. So an interesting sort of highlight there. It's almost like by not including that really draws attention to their other functions. Now there's a few that do have 8 and they're not edible, right? So, what's going on here? Again, Narculculate lives on the Sidrax latifolia, shown on the left here. In Kaytetye, that plant is called Argy. But it's interesting that, you can't say Argy 8, right? That's just totally not acceptable. And instead, it's got this unique word, Narculculate. Now, Narculculate to me has resonances of the respect register. A lot of respect register starts with an initial N. It's really uncommon in the lexicon to start a word with initial N. So this plant is really important. It's a keystone species, the most favoured vegetable type food, and very important religiously. So again, maybe there's interesting that it's got the respect register sort of overtones by its sounds, and also, perhaps this somehow relates to a juxtaposition, a sort of an antonymy of, respect and edible. And, I've never heard that anyone ever ate this in marginal times, so I don't know. And similarly at Outtakes, we still haven't found either of the caterpillars that reside on these species. Caterpillars are much harder to come by, only after rain, unlike wood-boring larvae. Yeah, so 2 really interesting exceptions here. And, I think these sort of exceptions really draw attention to themselves and highlight some other functions. So I want to conclude by making a few comments, and maybe then I'll just show a very short bit of the video from some of the field work. Okay, so in summary, Kaytetye is a major food source in harsh environment. It really was a harsh environment here. Nomenclature encodes edibility, this ADA, and that's obviously really important if you haven't had to eat things for a long time. So it's a whole mnemonic device going on here. Unlike any other edible food category, there is no such sort of quasi-productive suffix. I'm suggesting that the exceptions highlight particular religious significances, or they could also, I acknowledge it could also be, a loss of knowledge. I mean, people haven't had to survive in starving times for a long time. So, possibly they were eaten and this knowledge is forgotten. In fact, there is, a little bit of evidence that could be the case. So the quasi-productive ada suffix, when it's borderline acceptable, this also is another way of, I guess, another bit of evidence to suggest that the hosts that it attaches to are more recent borrowings. So some of this vocabulary from neighbouring languages that has come into everyday use in Kaytetye is quite recent, and most young people do not speak Kaytetye fluently. They might know a little bit of vocab, but increasingly they're using vocab from neighbouring languages. So, possibly the productability of this ada says something about the word that it's attaching to. So before I show this little video excerpt, I want to acknowledge all the Kaytetye and entomologists that have worked on this, doing this field work. It's just been so much fun, and hopefully the video will give you a sense of the fun in locating these things. I mean, many of the younger people who were involved with this project hadn't ever, had no cause to dig up any of these grubs. So, they really enjoyed learning about these things as well. So I'm going to swap screens and play a video and then some comments. So I'm going to show you an excerpt of this edible insect larvae in the kangaroo swamp grass. If you can remember what that one is. Anyway, you'll see a bit of it. Actually, I'll just make sure I shared sound. Okay.
Got the technique going here.
Just have a look much in that thing. Yeah.
It's not very big. I've never seen that. It's very soft.
What a minute there. Wait, do I knock it down?
Hey!
There.
Wow,
Yeah.
guys, I've given up.
Third one. Paint them out in the corner.
My pocket
Oh,
here. Oh, you got another one.
There, another one.
Oh,
Little one.
Good
Hey, people, make it that. Yeah, and get them bad. I'm turning. Ain't go back where they get. But in the other game, real one. Long time.
Pun cooker job.
Now, pong on the yap. They ain't Mamma la grandera no ang matala japa. Ine pongotari. Aicha. Nano ko na kain ng tapi ang tangkri ka
Very
gantara.
still, very still,
One pwede na no.
very still.
Okay, I hadn't subtitled that, but she's talking about how it wasn't cooked and the places where she had them as a kid, and also how it gives you a toothache if you eat too many of them. So I'll end there, and if anyone's got any comments or questions.